also with WorkWeek. And I'm with Fabio Bosco, who's with Trade Union Federation Conlutas in Brazil, is also with the transit workers in Sao Paulo, and has been struggling in the labor movement, the working class, to defend workers who are facing a epidemic of COVID. So welcome to our program, Fabio.
Thank you, Steve, for the invitation.
So Fabio, maybe you can talk about what happened in Brazil, because we know that like Trump, Bolsonaro was saying that the COVID was a hoax and people should not be worried about it. And that apparently, like in the United States, where we've lost over 530,000 people, is costing a lot of lives now in Brazil.
Yes, definitely. I think it's a very similar situation, you see, Steve, because now we lost 300,000 people up to now. And the president of Brazil, the far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, well, he bet in the pandemic, let's say, scattering among the people. And so in few months, everyone would be affected by the pandemic, but then you would have herd immunity, and then everything would be okay. But what's happening is that we have a first wave. Now we are in the second wave. This wave is much worse than the first one. The death toll is very high. I can tell you the situation here in Brazil is dreadful. And you can say that the main one responsible for that is the national government, is President Bolsonaro. Because look, Steve, there is one difference between Bolsonaro and Trump. Trump at least bought vaccines, you see, and Bolsonaro did not. So we are having to produce vaccines here in Brazil, and it's slow up to now, you see. We managed to vaccinate 7% of the people up to now with one shot. Maybe now in April, it will be able to vaccinate 1 million people per day. But so this is one difference for worse between Bolsonaro and Trump.
And talk about what the conditions are as far as COVID. I mean, in the overflow in the healthcare system, the privatization of healthcare. He also kicked out the Cuban doctors, even though now Cuba has apparently a vaccine it's developed, which it wants to release. But how have the working people, the people of Brazil, been affected by this COVID pandemic?
Look, Steve, today, the situation is very bad. The hospitals are overwhelmed. In the majority of the states, you have no UCI beds available for the people. But still, there is a public healthcare system in Brazil which used to be powerful, you see. But 30 years of underinvestment make it weaker. Even so, it has a presence all over the country, and we are counting on these public services in order to help the people, to save the people that are infected.
And privatization of Brazil, I mean, the United States was involved. In fact, the AFL-CIO was involved in a military coup in Brazil to bring in corporate capitalists who wanted to privatize the economy. How has Bolsonaro attacked the working class in Brazil, not only with privatization of healthcare, but with other industries like oil?
Well, the idea of Bolsonaro, I think there are two main ideas, you see. One is to bring back the dictatorship to Brazil. And the second one is to privatize everything that's possible to privatize. But what's the problem? There is a lot of resistance among the people against the dictatorship, you see. The polls show that only 15% of the people would support some kind of dictatorship here in Brazil. And privatizations are not popular these days. So there are difficulties, you see. What they do, they do it slowly. They privatize sections, parts, oil wells, but to privatize the whole oil company, for instance, it's still a big debate here in Brazil.
And the rise of fascism, I know that Bolsonaro was encouraging the military and the police. Has there been increased repression in Brazil against labor and against the left?
Well, we have always had a lot of repression against labor and against social movements, particularly the Black movement. I don't know if American people are aware, but here in Brazil, there is a genocide of the Black young people. Something around 60,000 people are killed every year in Brazil. It's really a genocide. So this level of repression is still there. Of course, Bolsonaro's speeches, they boast these small fascist groups to take action, but still they are a minority, you see, Steve. And maybe the strongest sections of them are busy doing illegal business. There is something here in Brazil we call militias, which are right-wing groups made of former policemen or former military that they control areas and take money from the people. So these groups are busy making money. So that the level of repression is still, it has not changed. And as I told you, Steve, there is a problem here. As the president wants to go back to a dictatorship, and both the working people and the big business, they don't want. And so when there is something, a strong repression, it gets the headlines, you see, because they are afraid that Bolsonaro may move in this direction. So the level of repression is the same, is still high.
And Bolsonaro has, and the right wing in Brazil were successful in putting Lula, a leader of the Workers' Party, in prison. Why don't you talk about the Workers' Party and Lula, because he is talked about as running in the next election. What was the situation with the Workers' Party? Did they stop privatization? And what is the political situation as far as the Lula and the Workers' Party in Brazil in relationship to the struggle?
You see, Steve, this sanitary crisis brought an economic crisis and a political crisis. And so what's happening now is that big business want to have all cards on their hands. You see, 2 weeks ago, it started an uprising in Paraguay, which is a neighboring country here. And the people went to the streets because there is no hospitals, there is no vaccines. You see, it's the same situation as we have in Brazil. So what the big business, what they are afraid is that a social movement may emerge and get out of control. And who can control it? Bolsonaro, what he would do, he would put the military in the streets. Then Brazil would become a new Myanmar. So the other card is Lula, you see, because Lula is something like the Democrats. He has a lot of support among the labor leaders, you see, reformist left, the reformist leadership of social movements. So he is in better position to deal with any social explosion. And so what happened? The Supreme Court canceled the sentences against Lula. And now Lula can run. And you see, Steve, look what Lula did. His first speech after his sentence was canceled was to call a national unity front with the mainstream bourgeois parties in order to offer a solution, a way out of Brazilian crisis. You see, it would be something like a left-wing party in the US to call the Democrats and part of the Republicans to make a unity to find a solution and later to run in the elections with one candidate. You see, so what I can tell you, this is an illusion. It's true that the people, the working people are angry against Bolsonaro. They are afraid as well, but they are angry. And there is a possibly we are going to have an anti-Bolsonaro wave in the elections next year. You see, and Lula, what he wants to do, to put him together with the bourgeoisie to go over this wave and be elected president or vice president. I don't know what will be the bargaining among them. But what we see is that labor and the social movements will not benefit from a government of this type. You see, it's the same experience we had for 13 years. 13 years. And so we believe that we should work in another direction, you see, to build an alternative of the working class. That we should go in this direction and not mess with the mainstream bourgeois parties.
And Conlutas is an independent trade union federation. How is it organized and what is its role politically?
CSP Conlutas emerged during Lula mandate, you see, because Lula, in the beginning of his mandate in 2003, he carried out a reform in the social pension system of public workers. And so a section of labor split with Lula and started CSP Conlutas. So CSP Conlutas is I can tell you, is a very left-wing oriented labor federation, labor and people's federation. And currently, what we are doing, there is something interesting in Brazil now, Steve, which is we have the first signs of workers' resistance to the situation we have been living since the pandemic started. So we had teachers' struggles. They call it sanitary strikes. Because what happened? The teacher go to the school to work, and then one teacher get COVID, the other one, 10 students. And so they decide to stop because otherwise everyone will be contaminated by the pandemic. So the sanitary strikes among teachers, they managed to stop the schools. And also there are some sections of some workplaces of oil workers that they also carried out sanitary strikes. So we believe that this reaction of the working class together with social movements, they can bring a new reality for the country. That's what we believe. And we are standing for a national lockdown because now the government, all governments in Brazil, they are making something half-heartedly. They close the shops, they close the schools, they close the pubs, but everything else is functioning, you see? And so more than half of the working class, they have to work. If they don't go to work, they don't have wages. That's the problem we are facing now. So we are standing for a national lockdown. We are standing for an emergency allowance to the poor and the unemployed, support for the small business. We are also standing for waiving patent rights so that we can accelerate the producing of vaccines here in Brazil and nationalize all private hospitals and put all this healthcare system and the production of vaccines under workers' control. That's our demands. But we feel that to get any of these demands, we have to fight to put down Bolsonaro and his deputy, Mourão, you see? So we combine these necessities for the working class to survive the pandemic with the struggle against the one that is the main responsible for the situation the working class have been living in Brazil.
And Fabio, maybe you can talk, you say that the situation is dreadful as far as COVID. How is Sao Paulo being affected by the COVID pandemic?
São Paulo is now is the epicenter of the pandemic here in Brazil. So what happens? The government of São Paulo, they announced that there are some places still in hospital, but the line that are demanding UCI beds are much larger than the number of UCI beds that are available, you see. So what we say is that the hospitals collapsed. They cannot meet the demand. Up to now, 135 people died in the line to get a UCI bed here in São Paulo, which is the richest part of the country. The lockdown, I told you, we don't have a lockdown. We have the shops, pubs, and schools closed only. So that's why I tell you, it's a dreadful situation. It's a very difficult situation. And let me add something more, Steve. The pandemic is bringing an economic crisis, but together with it, there is inflation of the most basic food stuff that people need to eat, you see, like rice, like beans, coffee. The prices are much higher than they used to be last year. So it's a very complicated, I would say dramatic situation. And I feel that sometime, sooner or later, we are going to have sacking in supermarkets, you see, because the poor people, they are desperately in need of food. And so that's a situation we have in São Paulo.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Fabio Bosco. He is with Conlutas. He's a transit worker and an activist in Sao Paulo. And they, like American people, face a dreadful situation as far as the COVID pandemic and the failure of the system to protect working people, the poor, and the mass of people, as well as minorities. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.